So the cat's here, but he doesn't want to sit in the chair. Are you happy? Hi. So you may not get to see the cute face. You'll hear him purring though, almost certainly. And it's thundering. What a great video. We're in for a great time. Hello and welcome to An Abundance of Books. My name is Julie and today we're going to be talking about everything that I read in May. April I was super slumpy, so May I was still sort of getting back into the swing of things. I read 11 things, but quite a few of them were short. And to emphasize how short, I thought we would go through it in order of page count from lowest to highest. But first I did want to mention I read everything from my May TBR, you can watch that there, except for two things. The first was the Kaiju Preservation Society, just because it didn't come in from the library on time. I was very much in the mood to read it, but it didn't happen. And the second one is right here, Arusha and the Song of Death. I DNF'd this, which was super surprising for me. But in retrospect, I think it sort of makes sense. My review of the first book in this Pandava quartet was that it was really complicated for a middle grade. And I definitely felt that with this. I think we're picking up immediately after the events of the first book. And there's just too many characters and too many terms for me to be like cold turkey dropped into it. I even went and read the Wikipedia article for the first one to try to refresh my memory, and like I got fantasy fatigue from a Wikipedia page. So per the rules of my TBR game, this should be unhauled, but it's part of a series. I'm not going to get rid of it. I could potentially pick this up in the future, but like I think I'd fully have to read the first one and read this one immediately right after, which I don't know if that's in the cards for this whole brain. But we should probably talk about some books that I did actually read. Coming in at 112 pages is People Change by Vivek Shraya. I have a correction to make in my TBR. I refer to her as a trans woman. She prefers trans femme, which is my bad, still goes by she, her pronouns, but that's also sort of what the book is about. Her complicated feelings about how she wants to identify and the need to put labels on things. The whole idea of it is that change is a good thing. I'm explaining it very poorly. It was well done. It definitely wasn't as good as her first book, I'm Afraid of Men. That one had a very clear like thesis with it. This one felt more just like musings, which were still really interesting and impactful and will stick with me, just not in the same way. I gave this 4 stars. Then, also coming in at 112 pages, How, out of 11 books, are 2 of them the same? Actually, I have 2 sets of 2 in this, so it's wild. But I read Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh. I read this for my, what did I call it? 24-hour Read Harder challenge vlog, where I tried to complete a bunch of the challenges in 24 hours. So this was a short queer fantasy retelling. And I didn't like it. Novella nature of it didn't really work. And there was also like a shift at the halfway point that changed the vibe and direction of the story. And when you're only 112 pages, it just wasn't what I was looking for. This is about Tobias, who lives in the woods, and one day he comes across Henry. That's gotta be his name. And they spark up a friendship and talk about the woods and stuff. Again, something that I feel like didn't necessarily have a thesis, more just like vibes, and I'm not a vibes kind of gal most of the time. I think if you're the kind of person who enjoys light fantasy, like I'm not fantasy of any kind, then you could probably enjoy this, but no, 2 stars from me. Then also for that video, coming in at 144 pages, I read I Would Leave Me If I Could by Halsey. This is a collection of poetry that I enjoyed reading enough. Poetry isn't really my thing. You can see the Read Harder challenge is just pushing me out of my comfort zone. But my comfort zone is where I want to stay. I gave this 2 stars. I think that there were some really quality things in there, but all of the poems were like a page or 2. I think there were 81 poems in it, and reading them all back to back just really didn't work. They got really samey after a while. They mostly felt like things that were going to become songs but didn't quite make it. I am no poetry expert, so I am not judging it on that at all, just whether I thought they were good. There were definitely some standouts in there, but like 3 out of 80 that I would actively think are good, I have to end up giving this a 2-star. Then, coming in at 174 pages, we have Beneath the Sugar Sky by Seanan McGuire, the third book in the Wayward Children series. It feels so much smaller than 174. It's such an itty-bitty book. In my TBR, I mentioned that I didn't know if I liked the school books or the in-world books, and that this one would sort of be a deciding factor, but it ended up being both. I would argue the POV character in here is Cora, who is chilling at the school one day when a girl drops from the sky, and it's a little like road trip quest to get her name is Rini, back to where she belongs. And I thought it was super fun. It visits places that you know from the first 2 books, but like brings this really lighthearted flair to it. The ensemble nature of this worked really well. Like, I think Cora is the POV character, but there are 5 of them traveling around. This is also my first Seanan McGuire after having read Middle Game, where I said she's very much vibes and no plot. This one has a good amount of plot in it, thankfully, but also the like whimsical nonsense nature does get exhausting after a little while. So I do think the novella format is much better for her, for me. But yeah, I just thought that this was a super fun time, and I'm really happy to have read it. It's gotten me re-engaged. I feel like it's a series that I am obligated to like more than I actually do, but this one was a very pleasant surprise. I'm giving it 4 stars, just not exactly perfect for me. And now we can do the ceremonial changing of the displayed book. I haven't taken a really good look at this cover before now, but it's gorgeous. Next, coming in at 240 pages, is Confessions by Kanae Minato. I remembered I said it wrong in my TBR, so it's Minato. This was such a strange book. I think I liked it, but I'm still not sure. In my mind, this is what that book Lemon wanted to be. It's very hard to explain without spoiling, but the setup is this teacher is teaching her last day of school before she leaves, and she does like this lecture for the class, and some secrets and stuff come to light. It's extremely confusing and a very stylized book. Like, it is written in 6 chapters parts, each one from a different perspective, very much like Lemon. The voiciness of it can be hard to get on board with. There's no dialogue, like dialogue is implied, and so that can make it feel clunky sometimes. But the actual story is really interesting. I think it retreads the same thing a few too many times, but like chapters 3 and 4 were so good. I just think that the overall mystery ended up being a little bit disappointing for me. I'm sorry, it's really hard to talk about. I would recommend if you're interested. It's definitely unlike any thriller that I've read before. I mean, it was kind of like Lemon, but Lemon wasn't a thriller. This definitely had thrillery stuff. There's also some like representation-y things that I am curious to see other people's takes on. I didn't read any Goodreads after this. I probably should. But it is also the pick for the Literally Dead book club, so I'm curious to see what the hosts' opinions are. I gave it 3 stars just because I don't know how I feel about it. I didn't hate it, I didn't love it. I am certainly confused by it. Next, coming in at 299 pages. Like, we haven't even hit 300 yet. Like, these are short books I'm talking about. It was Dial for Aunties by Jessica Sutanto. This is a new favorite book for me. I am so shocked this didn't end up being anything like what I expected, and I had such a great time. It is the story of Medi, who accidentally kills her blind date and then has her aunties help her cover it up. But they are also a wedding company where they do like the catering and the entertainment and the photography, and those happen on conflicting weekends. What's a girl to do? It is such a fun, ridiculous ride, and I truly have never been this stressed in my life. In a book, I've been more stressed in my life, but like every chapter ends with a cliffhanger. They've gotten themselves into some new trouble, the twists and turns that this takes that I had never anticipated. It was so fun and so unexpected, and I loved it. And I can always tell when something is a new favorite because there is almost always an aspect to the books that I love where it just does one thing really badly. So there's a romance in here, and it's just objectively bad, I feel like. Very insta-love, though she does like point that out in a meta way. I'm curious to read the second book because it looks like it's her wedding, presumably to the love interest, no spoilers. And how is that going to work? Because he was not an interesting character. Anyway, if you need a push to read Dial A for Aunties, please do it. It is so good. And then right after that, at 304 pages, we have probably another favorite. 5 stars certainly, but who knows how much it'll stand the test of time. But it's How to Be Perfect by Michael Schur. This is absolutely not what I was expecting. I thought that this was going to be like a satirical advice book, like an adulting 101 for adults. I thought it was just going to be jokes the whole way through with like a sprinkle of advice. But this is like a legit philosophy book. This is Philosophy 101. It introduces you to all the greats, all the schools of thoughts, puts different scenarios through the ringer for each of these worldviews and like sees how they come out the other side. It is super fascinating and it's super well researched. It's basically everything Michael Schur learned while he was doing research for The Good Place. Also, the audiobook has a full cast. It's mostly Michael Schur, but then basically everyone from The Good Place pops up, as well as a consulting philosopher on it, so he corrects Michael if he gets some stuff wrong. It was just such a fun time, and I feel like I learned a lot, and I feel like I'm gonna need a physical book to read and like make notes in of things that I want to research further, because it is still very introductory. But also make sure you've watched The Good Place before reading this, because it spoils some stuff, and also I feel like some of the concepts are easier explained through the show. Next up, we have The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. This I have had for seemingly so long, and I've been wanting to read it but really intimidated by it. And I think I was partially right to be intimidated. This is a very stylized book. How many times can I say stylized? But this is a very specific point of view. A very unique horror book that I can see people not loving, but I also do kind of think this is technically perfect. The opening to this is one of the best openings that I have ever read. Today is the anniversary of Little Girl with Popsicle. It happened by the lake 11 years ago. She was there and then she wasn't. So it was already a bad day when I discovered that there is a murderer among us. Tell me that isn't the most perfect opening you've ever heard. This is such a cool book that you also really can't talk about. You can't talk about the cat. There's one of the perspectives is a cat. It's something that you kind of have to finish, and then there's an author's note at the end, and it kind of ties it all together. Like, you truly have to be on board for being confused a good amount. Like, you'll want to DNF it, but you can't. The one thing that I will say for this that I keep debating on is my instinct is to give it a 4-star, because there's no way to say stuff without spoilers. I figured out the twist before it happened. I had a pretty good idea of what was happening in here because something else used this trope that I saw quite recently. And I really want to talk about it, but I'm not going to talk about it. You should just read this book and then you can confirm everything that I'm thinking. But yeah, when you figure out a twist, it's always harder to enjoy the book in the way that you're meant to. For me, anyway. Maybe other people can get on board with it, but I'm picky like that. So I'm giving it 4 stars, but like, I could be talked into a 5. And I'm so happy that I loved this because I already bought Catriona Ward's other book and I need to be able to justify the purchase. So I will be reading Sundial shortly, I'm sure. Then I read this brand new released Kissed Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. I had to end up buying this because the Indigo exclusive doesn't have anything exclusive on the inside at all. It's just that the cover is different. The original has green instead of the purple here, and I think we can all agree that this is just objectively better. It's also maybe one of the most beautiful books that I own. That spine is gorgeous. Look at these end pages, and then the naked hardback. Like, I am not worthy. My foot's starting to fall asleep. You still want to go? Good. This one is a really hard one for me. This is my third book by Kanae Minato, and I feel like there's just always something a little bit off about the writing. Like, I can never fully immerse myself in the world, and I can't explain it. I wish that I could. Oh, thank goodness the cat left. I can stretch my leg. Which is a shame because, like, this in concept is a perfect book for me, but I can never fully get on board. This book is following Chloe Green, and her arch nemesis, Shara Wheeler, has disappeared. But Shara kissed her and 2 other people right before she disappeared, and so the team is teaming up to figure out what happened to Shara, where she went, does she want to be found. It's a super fun, like, scavenger hunt plot. It's just really fun. 1 second, Giddy. The other thing that stopped me from getting fully invested in this book is there's an author's note or something at the front. Dear reader, make of that what you will. But it's basically a content warning that this explores elements of religious trauma and homophobia. And I have a smidge of religious trauma, so just reading that put me really on edge. Reading this, just like constantly waiting for it to happen, or like not trusting characters, anticipating what they were going to say, because it's very much like a Southern Bible Belt fundamentalist background that I know pretty well. So that just sort of put me on edge with, like, isn't the book's fault, but it ended up being virtually nothing. Like, there was nary a sermon in sight. It opens with the Wheelers going to church, but, like, doesn't talk about what was said there, doesn't do anything. It's almost like all of the religion and homophobia is off page. It's definitely still a part of the story, but it's just sort of understood that, like, people are homophobic. You don't actually see anything on page. So you can know that going into it. This book, for me, though, it just had some issues with choices. Something happens about 1/3 from the end that I think was a mistake. I understand why, but I think it was a mistake. But this had some good discussions. There was one I'm thinking of particularly around gender identity that I thought was super well done. So I would recommend this book in general. For Casey McQuiston's YA debut, I think it is really well done. Confident in that for this time. This isn't gonna change. I realized I didn't say page counts. This is 341 pages and this is 358. And I realized because the last 2 books that we have to talk about are both 384 pages. So we can talk about them in whatever order we want, but I think I'm going to talk about Portrait of a Thief first because I just finished this. I have many feelings about this book. As you will see, I bought a physical copy because the library was taking its damn time, and then on May 25th, this was chosen as the book of the day from the New York Public Library. Click to watch my video where I tried that before, but it just felt like a sign, and I was pretty confident that I was gonna love this book. I read some reviews beforehand because this was expensive. This was $35, so I needed to make sure it was worth it. And the review that I saw that had like a middling review said that it was a literary heist. And I was like, I can get on board with literary if I need to. The problem in here was the literary was not good and the heist was not good. It is told in such a strange way. There keep being these sentences where it'll go, this is what he remembered, colon, and then just talk like normal. Or this is how it happened, colon. It's not wrong, it just doesn't add anything. And it took me out of the story every single time. It happened at least a dozen times. Which at that point, it's starting to feel like an em dash, like a joke. But the biggest problem with this book is that the heists are fade to black. Like a sex scene? Like a sex scene. It doesn't make any sense. Like they'll prep to do the heist, everyone's in their positions, and then it'll cut to after, and then in the subsequent chapters reflect on what actually went down in the heist. And even when they did that, it didn't really make sense what the positioning was. I need to explain what this book is about. It follows Will Chen, who is a Chinese American student. He is working at a museum when it gets robbed, and one of the criminals drops a card, and Will then leads his own team to do a heist. And they are retrieving stolen Chinese artifacts from museums all around the world, which is one thing I think to know about this. They are not doing a single heist, they are doing multiple heists, which means you can fade to black multiple times. It also just didn't make sense, like, how these kids were able to do everything. The hacking in particular is always frustrating as a software engineer. I wanted more like fun social engineering moments. Like, there's a couple where they interact with museum employees and like lift stuff off of them. I wanted more of that, but the heists in general just sort of seemed to be like they planned it off screen and executed it off screen, and you're just kind of left picking up the pieces. I'm gonna be ranting about this book for a while, so strap in. It also did a lot of dialogue, full paragraph of internal monologue, more dialogue. So it'd be like, how are you doing this morning? I reflected on my whole childhood and thought about blah, 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 blah. Fine, how are you? Which is fine sometimes, but it happened all the time, and the flow doesn't work with that at all, especially when what they're thinking about isn't related to what they're talking about. Also, Miss Lee is obsessed with describing the skyline and the color of the sky and the moon, and a constant. And I think the big problem with this is like there just wasn't enough plot to fill this book out. The blurb is the best part about it. Like, just the idea of that, you've already gotten all of the best parts of this book. Because the focus of the book seems to be backward facing. It's trying to talk about the immigrant experience and generational expectations, but without any of the characters having a fleshed out life outside of this heist. They all have parents and grandparents that they talk about, but you never meet anybody. Kitty, stop. The cat's scratching at the door to get out, and then I open it, and he doesn't want to leave. If this wanted to be more literary, it needed to have better characters. But the characters were all very one note, and they all cared about one thing, and then all of their internal dialogue would be about that one thing. There's hints of something good in here, it just felt unfocused. And like you didn't actually want to do a heist novel. If you want to do a heist novel, you have to have the heist figured out. Like the first thing. Like in a mystery, I feel like you don't just discover the mystery. You have to know all of the twists and red herrings that you're gonna put in before you start working on characters. I just wish that this had focused more on the stuff that I cared about, and the writing style had been something for me. That's something that I'm figuring out too, is I can forgive a lot of things in books, but writing style is really hard too. Because even if what I'm reading is interesting, if the words don't click with me or take me out of the story, then like I can't invest in the same way. Not that I'm a snob for writing or anything, like my standards are pretty low. This was just too much for me. So I have a problem where like, this is 2 stars because there are things that are objectively good with it. But I paid $35 for it and I did not have a good time. So I want to give it 1 star, but I'm not going to do that. But I don't think I've had any 1 stars this year. And I haven't had animosity to a book before like I do now to this. I really like this book in concept. I just really hated it in execution. I've been talking for way too long. Let's try to speed through the last book that I read, One by One by Ruth Ware. This one is just sort of baffling in its choices. This is about a company retreat to the mountains of France, and they get snowed in and people start dying. Great in concept, poor in execution. The biggest problem is that this ensemble cast only has 2 perspectives that you're reading from, and I feel like that was such a waste. It narrowed the story so much. There are points where like parties split up and do different things, but you only get to hear from the ones with your characters, and it would have been so much more interesting if it had all been fleshed out. And also one of the POVs is infuriating to read from. She's just like whiny and awful. It also turned what should have been the epilogue into 40 pages, which is baffling to me. That's the thing with this book, is like I'm not mad, I'm just confused by the choices. Because I gave this book 2 stars, but I think it's not that bad. Like I don't have animosity toward it in the same way that I do this. But I'm just so disappointed because like The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware is one of my favorites, and this I feel like would have been so easy to fix though I don't think Ruth Ware has ever done multi-POV before. Maybe this was just her like getting her feet wet with writing multiple perspectives, but like it didn't work. It felt like Erin was the POV character and Liz was tacked on at the last second because she figured it probably should be multi-POV. And the problem is, I think that the story here is interesting. I just don't think that Ruth Ware is necessarily the one to tell it. Because the other thing with this is the company that's going on retreat is called Snoop. They are a music listening app. There's lots of stuff to do with it. But the technology part of it was missing. The thing that I did really like about this was that they were at a ski lodge and they do lots of skiing. I thought that the descriptions of the mountain and the paths that they had to take were really interesting and really atmospheric. Like the atmosphere in here is still top tier. Ruth Ware is really good at that. Yeah, I think that there's a good story in here. It's just about the execution. Not even just the epilogue part, but even before that, there was a lot of just slow, everybody figure out the thing that I had figured out a long time ago. Like, I know that everyone says that the reveal in here is obvious, but like, it's obvious. I don't think it's a bad book. I'm not mad at it, just disappointed. Okay, I'm done talking. I've talked for so long. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Tell me your opinion on any or all of the books that I read. Have I swayed you toward? Have I swayed you away from? I hope that you have a lovely June, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye.